Welcome to the 49th edition of Women's Wrestling Weekly, the show. Kyle Klingman here, Scott Beck there. How about a little more time machine talk, Scott? Maybe it's because Back to the Future is 40 years old and they're going to do a reboot. They're going to have it at our theater, so I'm pretty excited about that. Don't know if you've seen that movie
I
before.
love it. Yeah, I love
Yeah,
them.
absolute perfect movie. Let's just imagine, and I probably favor the past a little bit just because I think that we don't give enough credit to the pioneering efforts. But thinking that through, if you had the DeLorean, if you had the time machine, imagine if you could take a Kylie Welker or a Kennedy Blades, take them back in time to the 1920s when wrestling was getting started and women weren't allowed to compete in this capacity and they were looked down upon, and you rolled out Kylie Welker to wrestle someone. Imagine the look on their faces when they saw how impressive Kylie Welker was, and probably what they would do to them if you did the time machine and you didn't have any advantages of the natural human evolution.
What you're saying, if she was wrestling a woman back then,
No, I'm
another
saying a
woman?
guy.
Yeah, I mean, look at yeah, I think they'd be pretty intimidating. I mean, if you look at football players, just from the era, they were tiny. People have evolved. So, yeah, I think they'd be very perplexed and not know what the hell's going on. To be honest with
Yeah, they'd roll her out and they wouldn't know that someone could
you.
have that high technical ability. And I think the referees wouldn't even know what to do and they might stop the match and say this is illegal because it would be such a bludgeoning.
Like it brings up an issue like how long has like freestyle wrestling been around? Like in the US it was like folk style, catch can, and these older styles. Like when did freestyle internationally start?
It did start in the 1900s, and everything's again has the evolution too of how the rules were. And I think in 1948 they had 15-minute matches, and I mean you just see the differences as it goes along. I don't remember when it was the old Fila before it went to UWW if women dealt with some of the indiscretions behind closed doors and fixing matches and some of the foul play that happened early on. I don't know if women had to deal with that, but they had to deal with some other things like the Outstanding Wrestler Award was the most beautiful. They gave kitchen appliances, just some things that seem so ridiculous, and they are ridiculous. And again, when you go back and you think about what they had to go through and just some of the nonsense that has been cleaned up today, we still have some progress to go, but it's so much better than what it was.
I think and I think the interesting time machine would be what's this going to look like in 40 years if there hasn't been a nuclear holocaust by then or something, people still exist. Like I'd love to like how much more are people going to evolve? How much stronger can people get? How much faster can people get? There's got to be some where we're approaching like an asymptote of the human body, and does a sport at some point get completely does it keep evolving or do you hit a limit? That would be very interesting to me.
Especially with quantifiable sports like track and swimming. At some point, you'd think swimming, the times would stop and they keep getting better and better and better.
I
I don't know if
know.
some of that's technology. I know with track, there's technology involved with the tracks and the ability to bounce with shoes and just some of the surfaces that they use. I know that you can just keep getting faster that way. And they did a situation where they got under a 2 hour marathon. It wasn't sanctioned because they have rules in place on how you're able to achieve that world record, but they have had pace setters and they got under the 2 hour mark with that. Again, it's not an official world record, but the human body was able to get under 2 hours. It's
But there
incredible.
is an asymptote. I mean, they thought it was, I mean, the concept of the 4 minute mile seemed like, people thought could never be done. But there's got to be a limit where the improvements just can't, because anatomically there's a limit. I know you can get more aerodynamic or strength, but at some point, like for example, the human body, I know the bones can get maybe stronger with nutrition, but there is a concept of buckling where a certain mass just, you can't support. So it's pretty interesting. Well, it would be funny, we'll be long dead, but it would be funny to see what this looks like in 40 years.
A treat for you. U23 World Championships. Guess who is registered for Japan at 57 kilograms? Akari Fujinami will be wrestling
All
this
right.
year. So I don't know if you saw that,
I
but
didn't. That's a
you,
treat. I want to see her in action. Good. Up at 57. Good. She's not going to be small for 57. She's going to be a good size 57. I bet she'll cut for that. She filled out a lot. That's great. I'm excited. I thought you were going to say Onishi
oh,
because she could have ran the table. She had U20s and seniors, and we'll get to it, but she just lost this week. But wow, good. I'm glad. I want to see Fujinami.
and this is fun because I love the U23s. I think sometimes it's a little bit of an afterthought when you have U17s, you have U20s, seniors, and then you have the U23s. I love this tournament because you do get a lot of these high level individuals. It's a senior tournament, Scott, and you get
It
senior level
is.
talent.
Yeah, it's really weird though because yeah, you can have weights that are just brutal, and then you could. I think I could be wrong. I think when Ning Ning Rong from China won the senior world championships, I think she lost to Grace Bulin in the U23s, and that has happened. Well, it can be a brutal tournament with a really tough bracket, or there are some weights that just don't have the depth, or randomly people aren't there. But I like the tournament. It'll be interesting. I didn't know the list came out. I want to take a look at Japan's roster because it'll be interesting to see who they send. You know, they're like in flux, and we'll get to that when we talk about them later. But they're figuring things out, I think.
So we printed all of the results from Japan historically, 1987 until present. This came from someone who said the article on Japan is both impressive and depressing. It's just so utterly dominating when shown in print. When you opened it, what did you think about seeing all of that data in a row about what Japan's done since 1987, which was the first Women's World Championships?
First of all, kudos to you for doing it because it's a little tedious and cumbersome, but fascinating. And I don't know how many people appreciate it. I'm glad that somebody commented on it. It means there are more than just me and you that want to see that. It is a great resource. It's fascinating. And then when you just go through that list, I mean, I like I lit up and I said, wow, this is great data to have. And it is. It's impressive and demoralizing. You just see how consistent and how deep. And then you look at the names and you go back. And people, if you haven't seen this on the FloWrestling website, Kyle just literally lists every, placement of the team and then all the world team and Olympic team members. And it is just saving, It's just a great resource to have if you're a junkie like we are.
This feeds into the conversation we had last week. We touched on this. It's why is high school wrestling folk style? And again, I can't think of reasons other than just tradition, trying to transition, and just flat out not wanting to do it as reasons for not switching over to freestyle. I think, again, Terry Steiner feels strongly about this that some of our growth is stunted because of our unwillingness to adapt and go to freestyle. And Scott, it doesn't make sense when you think about everyone wants to say wrestling is wrestling, and I've never liked that comment because it is wrestling, but you could throw in jujitsu, you can throw in judo, you could throw in sumo wrestling, you throw in any type of wrestling. It'd be like saying rugby is football. That'd be like
Yeah.
playing rugby, going to football. It'd be like
Yeah.
playing cricket and then going to baseball
Correct.
at the next level. There's a
And
lot
it
of
doesn't
different
mean
things.
and it doesn't mean there aren't skills that cross over and that certain positions. Listen, some people that the ladies that have wrestled a lot of folk style, like they tend to be better controllers and pinners. Like Helen is great at improving positions slowly and pinning. You'll see in like men, like you'll see like Haji Aliyev would have a guy do a snap go behind, and then he's doing a hip heist and facing the guy before he gets the takedown. So there's crossover, but it's exceptionally different.
I'm wondering from your vantage point, because Michaela, your daughter, did not wrestle folk style, and she doesn't know some of those folk style techniques. You said she doesn't know how to pin or cradle or do
She's
some of
pinned
those
two
things.
people, I think, in her life, pretty much, and tech, hundreds. She has no clue how to pin people. Yeah, but I think that's a lack of folk style. But what we had a way was when she first started wrestling. Okay, and this is really the crux of what the dilemma becomes. Okay, so she was wrestling at some private school in New York City, and she was doing folk style. Mary Mercado was the coach, who's active in the New York kind of wrestling scene. And I'd go and I'd wrestle with a couple of days a week. And we were doing folk style. At some point, though, then all of a sudden, you go to folk style nationals because, and then all of a sudden you start going to freestyle tournaments and you learn about the landscape that, the world teams are all in freestyle and that ultimately everything's freestyle. At some point, you're just sitting there and I'm saying, okay, so how much time do I want to spend, going over the nuances of a switch? And I'm not saying there can't be a position where a switch, and you'll see it in folk style. And again, she's not a cradler, and I was a cradler, and I'm really good with cradles, but we just didn't spend as much time. And you'll see, like even like Keegan O'Toole cradled a Russian in the Junior World Finals, I think, or semis, pinned him and pinned multiple. So all these moves work, but you just have X amount of resources to allocate in terms of the rules, the approach to controlling center, learning, just positions where you're not exposed to your back. But there is a beauty to some cheap tilts, and you'll see like Adeline used to do tilts, cheap kind of folk style tilts. It's just a question of, I think, one, you have scarce resources. What do you focus on? Probably having a folk style background, honestly, can be helpful for sure. And then in answer to why we don't do it, and I've asked this question, and this is the common answer. I mean, number one, I think it's like a system. When a system's entrenched, it's like you're fighting the laws of emotion. A body emotion wants to stay in motion. So people that have been coaching, if they're not active with USA Wrestling and in freestyle, and they're just been coaching for 20 years, the local junior high school or high school, many of them aren't year-round coaches, aren't taking the best ones obviously are, the clubs are, but many aren't taking their kids to the spring freestyle tournaments or working on freestyle. So that's what they do. There's also an issue with referees. I've heard this one a lot. And kind of New York at first was doing like this hybrid where they're doing like, folk style hybrid freestyle rules where the ref would whistle them up if nobody's turning somebody after a while. But a lot of the referees don't really understand freestyle that well. And again, it's hard to get them. And in theory, you need three, right? In theory, to do it the right way. You can do it with one, or you could do it with one in a second. But I just think it's laziness. And also as the sport grows and women's wrestling's growing, you need people to coach. So unless you have an active community with, like I said, I refer to like Menacing Valley, where you have like the Macalusos. There are many towns that have vibrant wrestling communities, and many don't. So if the school, and they say to the guy that's coaching the boys team, maybe, we'll give you an extra $5,000 if you also coach the girls, or, 10K, whatever the number is. And they're just kind of adding them along. It's not like a separate program. And I think we need to ultimately just shift. And as you bring in younger blood and people that are involved in women's wrestling and know it's freestyle, I think the newer coaches will not fight that as much.
So let's say we do the Band-Aid approach and we just say, we're going to rip this off and we're going straight freestyle across the board and you've got to adapt. What does that picture look like? Again, let's go time machine into the future. What happens if we say, we're going with freestyle, you're going to have to adapt? Do the coaches get on board? Do we have some fallout? Do we lose some support and momentum for the sport? What does that picture look like?
I think it's a little of both. I think in some areas it would be great, and some we would lose some momentum. And I think right now, I think that's a hard Band-Aid rip. I think we don't want to lose momentum right now because we have so much for women's wrestling. So as much as I love freestyle and want them all to wrestle freestyle, I don't think we can rip the Band-Aid off yet. I think maybe in a few years we can, and we'll have to transition, and it's also entrenched, like, Kylie, they're wrestling folk style, and they've had women's wrestling for a long time. That's going to be a tough switch. How do you get a big state like California that's tremendous support? I think it would be a tough Band-Aid. But I think at some point we need to maybe give like a 2-minute warning. As of this date, we're going to transition. You have X years, and we're going to start doing it gradually. I'm really not sure.
Conceptually, I like what's happening here with three major tournaments. You have Powerade, you have Ironman, and you have Beast of the East, all combining for a triple crown. I think this is innovative. I think it's a great solution because we're seeing more and more girls are saying, I want the big level competition. I want the highest level competition. And so if you can have an in-season situation where you can have a triple crown with three of the best tournaments, I think this is good for women's high school wrestling because the state tournaments are still awesome, but it's not the high level competition that you're going to get elsewhere. I think this is fantastic. I'm glad they got together. They're all in December. Kudos to
Is
these
it
three
all folk
tournaments.
style though?
It's
Is
all
it going to
folk
be
style.
okay? Yeah, which
It
I
is
don't. Again, ultimately that have something like that and you switch it to freestyle, but it's great. I think it's a phenomenal idea. I think the numbers are going to go up a lot. I think it's an intriguing concept and it's good. A lot of people sometimes do their own thing and don't want to work together, but this is I think a situation where it's going to increase the numbers in all the events, and it's exciting.
And think about if you're Taina Fernandez, who we continue to talk about, if you want something to motivate you, you can say, I'm going to go to these three tournaments essentially in consecutive weekends, and I'm going to try to win the Triple Crown. I just think it's a good incentive that's beyond the state tournaments or the national preps. I love it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's good. Again, going back to the folk style thing, the only thing is, let's say you have somebody that is wrestling, is in high school, is really focusing internationally. Do they really want to wrestle three tournaments in 3 weeks in folk style? That's the only thing where I think some of the names we're talking about, the top names, maybe they do just to check it off. But, once you're a world champ, do you really need to, get the domestic triple crown in folk style? I don't know. But I think overall it's a good thing, and maybe it gets tweaked.
And these high level girls are voting with their actions, whether it's going to Wyoming Seminary, where it's predominantly freestyle, or Valiant Prep and Everest Leydecker, where they wrestle a non traditional schedule that's freestyle, or you're just saying, I'm going to be homeschooled and I want to focus on freestyle. I think that girls are saying, I'm going to vote and I'm going to, through my actions, say, this is what I'm going to do and create my own path. I think that's the beautiful part of women's wrestling right now is that they can do that and they have the latitude to do that.
But yeah, because it's just not so structured where there's this normal path. But you're even seeing it, which I like in the boys, like some of the really good boys, either they may be going to the OTC, like some of the girls are doing, for the senior year of high school, or the boys are just training at local RTCs and just saying, okay, I know I could be a 4 or 5 time state champ. I'm talking about the hammers, but I want to be a world champ, where I want to be an NCAA champ, and I am going to train at a higher level. And you're seeing it more in freestyle. And I think to the extent that freestyle for men, I just think, obviously because of, I think, media, and flow and coverage and video, I think men's freestyle is just getting more and more participation at these big tournaments. And that just sets a tone, I think, and it makes it easier that those, if you have a boys' room where, you have girls that are training at the same place in a high school or something, but the boys are doing a lot of freestyle training, I think it makes those coaches be forced to, get better at freestyle too. So, yeah, I think the flexibility is good.
We know women's college wrestling is freestyle. McKendree just added another piece to its lineup. Jasmine Robinson, 2024 U20 World Champion, dynamic, has a lot of the big throws. A version of Kennedy Blades hasn't reached the high level senior success, but there are similarities in how they compete and how they wrestle. I think this is a big move for McKendree, and it puts them even deeper into the conversation and how they compete with Iowa. Again, Iowa is so deep, and you have two guaranteed NCAA champions in Kennedy Blades and Kylie Welker, so you know they're going to be starting with a huge advantage just to start out the tournament. But there's enough pieces in play. When you look at it and break it down, there's enough there where you can say they have a 25 to 30% chance where a couple years ago I would have said no team has a chance.
Yeah, this isn't a next topic. I mean, obviously they're still the favorite until they get beat, but Alexia Garcia, he's a very good recruiter. He's done a good job, and he'd always said, "Let's see how I do when I get my people," and he's starting to. And their team is really deep right now, and that's just another great piece. I mean, Robinson, as you said, U20 World Champ. She didn't win this year, but she's obviously capable. She's high level, and I think for her, being in that room will be good. I think there will be good coaching, good partners, and kudos to him. I mean, he's, as I said, he's a good recruiter, and I think he's a good coach, and I think McKendree needs to be taken very seriously this year by Iowa.
McKendree, and then we don't know what's going to happen with Lehigh. North Central's in a rebuild. King is definitely in a rebuild with Jason Mormon going to Tarleton State. Let's hope they add a Division I program. But as we think about the club scene, On December 7th, we have Oklahoma State's club team facing the University of Iowa. I hope this lays the groundwork for Oklahoma State creating a Division One program. It would be the next Power Four program to add. I like the visionary thinking on this. I just hope it continues to just sound the gong for another D1 program to add, and that could be Oklahoma State. If we have that, that is the game changer. If we get Oklahoma State and Iowa, and then hopefully we're off to the races.
Yeah, I'm going to backtrack just for 1 second. Tarleton State won again. They beat Southern Utah, so they're 6-0. So a school I never knew existed. I'm actually following the football team because Jason Mormon is coaching there, so it's kind of funny. But they're good, 6-0. To your point about Oklahoma State, I can't help but thinking again with zero knowledge on this and no discussions. It seems orchestrated to me that the club is getting in these good athletes, that they're putting Iowa on the schedule. It's just, if you're going to say what would be the pieces and the things you're going to do to bring this into a Division One program, it seems to me that these are signals slash pieces in a puzzle that somebody's, putting together. I think it'll be great. I think other pieces, with Lehigh now, I hope it just continues. I don't know where, like I'd love to see another Big Ten school, in Ohio State at some point, you know, um, and I'm sure some of these, now with the Brown news, we talked about with the endowment and what, Princeton has a good club and Columbia's got Emma Randall. I think the Ivies, Harvard's lagging, but they have a club. But I think the Ivies are going to, come through. But this is all just seems to be happening. Somebody's orchestrating some of this. And, I think it's great. It'll be fun to watch. I mean, obviously, Oklahoma State's going to be good in some weights, but Iowa should, just based on depth, handle them. But I think it's a good thing. It's going to raise awareness because if you could promote this, if you're Oklahoma State, you could blast this to your email donor base and fan base and then get more eyes on this. There can be more, this gets pressure, this gets eyes, and hopefully some donors who are, influential former wrestlers will just jump on the bandwagon that may not even be aware as much about where they are with women's wrestling. So it's a good thing.
Again, time machine. Let's hop in the DeLorean, look into the future. Can you imagine if they do all of this, go into Carver Hawkeye Arena, and they don't? I just think it would look terrible if Oklahoma State doesn't take that path.
I think what it comes down to is, supporting the community and donors, and I can't, as I said, again, no, nothing. I can't imagine that some of these things aren't going on behind the scenes.
Iowa Wrestling has a documentary coming out, and that ties into Who's Number One on Saturday, October 11th. Women's Who's Number One card starts at 2 p.m. Make sure you watch because we're going to see Reese Larramendy on the mic there, so we're excited about that. We'll put on the screen all of the matchups, but let's just focus on the main event where we have Everest Leydecker going against Epenesa Elison in the main event. That's going to be a fun one. I think a lot of people want to talk about who's going to win this match. I don't see it as much of a conversation because Elison is moving up in weight going against the U20 World Champion. I think this is Everest Leydecker's to win. She's already won 3. She's been in Final X. I think this is a no-brainer. I think that Everest is going to win this one.
Yeah, I mean, so do I. And that's not taking anything from Elison. I mean, she's lighter, she's going up, she's younger. Leydecker has a lot of senior experience. Stylistically, she gives challenges. She's very good on her feet. She knows how to use her leverage. She's relentless. It'll be interesting. Elison has as sweet a shot as you'll see. Her single leg's really beautiful to watch. We'll see what happens if she gets to it and how Leydecker deals with it. But I'm not expecting this to be very close. Not because I'm taking anything away from Elison. I just think stylistically, experience-wise, age-wise, size-wise, we'll see though. I'm intrigued by it. I think it'll be a good match, and I think there's a bunch of matches that should be, interesting. It's always a great event. I'm looking forward to hearing Reese, on the mic as well, and I'm looking forward to this. I think it'll be a good event. I hope everybody watches, and we'll do a post-op on it for sure.
Again, same thing with you. Elison is a phenomenal talent, and I love
Great.
what she can do. And yeah, she's so good. But it's just the moving up in weight going against someone who's as good as Everest Leydecker. I think that's a big task.
Yeah, and I don't know who Elison's also wrestling a bit. Leydecker is wrestling, whether it's Helen, Miracle's hurt right now, but she's recovering from surgery. But Michaela, Cosme. I mean, she's scrapping with singers all the time. So and Cejudo's, coaching does a great job, and Helen works with her. I mean, it's just, it's just, it's a level jump, and we'll see. And I think Allison's really good. So, but we'll see. I think it's just a process for her, and this will be a good match. I'm glad she's taking the match, and I'm glad Leydecker's taking the match. Sometimes people duck people, and by the way, if Leydecker wins, I think other than Anthony Knox, she will be only the second four-time who's number one champ, I believe, if she wins.
Correct. She'd be the first woman to do it, and then join
Yeah,
Anthony Knox as a four-time winner. So we
from
will
Jersey, impressive. Yeah,
tune in
if
on
she
that.
does it, maybe we're dead wrong, and Allison beats her up. We'll see. The
We'll see
beauty
that.
is we get to see.
We will get to see. Now, the Iowa women's wrestling documentary that Mark Bader had worked on for a long time is finally being released. It's on the inaugural season, so we're a couple years removed from that, but that's going to be a three-part series. They're going to show, I believe, the first episode between the women's card and the men's card is the world premiere, and then there's going to be the full series coming up later, and then they're going to release it in the subsequent weeks. But hope everyone will tune in on that. It was a phenomenal race against North Central. It was unbelievable how it came down to the wire for the nationals and the national championship. So be sure to tune in on that fantastic documentary
It
series.
was like a passivity call, almost like just one situation, perhaps. I mean, there's a million, but I haven't seen it. I'm sure you have. I'm sure it's gonna be really good. Bader does a really good job on these documentaries, and the Flow documentaries has been. There's some legendary ones. I mean, my favorite being Terry. I love, but there's a lot of good ones, and I think it's really important that the women's wrestling community watches this and talks about it.
You want to talk about this? Japan just had a tournament, and Yui Susaki, who is a 2020 Olympic gold medalist, multi-time world champion, she got defeated, moving up to 53 kilograms. She lost 2-1. What were your thoughts when you saw this?
I was surprised. She lost to keep Mokiuka, who was a world champion at 55, went down, lost to Haruna Okuno, who won the worlds this year in the trials. Twice she lost because they had the playoff, but Sasaki hasn't wrestled in a year, so I don't know which version of Yui this is. I don't know if she wanted to see how she feels, physically, strength wise. I know 50 is a hard cut for her. She has not lost in Japan since she lost to Ire, which she lost her a few times, and then Ire didn't medal at Worlds, so Yui got to get a second chance and won the Olympic gold medal in 21, but then lost obviously to Vinesh from India. So this is her first domestic loss. The only person that had ever beaten her before this was Ire multiple times. So this is the surprise to me. I didn't see the match. It was evidently a shot clock kind of match. I think a 1-1 shot clock match where Kyuka got the second one and then Yui couldn't get score late. Interesting, but 53 is really interesting, I think, in Japan because okay. Is this Sasaki probing, or is she going to cut back down to 50 now? Or did she say, okay, this wasn't a version of me that, was really, I don't know where she thinks she was or where she actually is. I could beat her. And then they're all going to have to beat, Akuno, who just won the Worlds, and beat Kyuka and Makata. So 53 is just literally so stacked, it's beyond belief. Multiple Olympic champions, multiple world. You have two Olympic champions at the weight, and if Makata, keeps going, you have Makata, Sasaki, she goes up. You have Kyuka's a world champ at 55. Akuna's a four-time world champ. So pretty deep. Going to be hard to make that team. And, whoever makes it from Japan is a strong favorite to win, the Worlds, moving forward. But we'll see what happens with Sasaki. And then the question is, what's Japan thinking? Are they, and I have no clue how it works there, but are they going to pressure to go back down to 50 because Yoshimoto didn't win? Didn't medal. That's an embarrassment when you're 4 deep with potential world champions or, for Japan. I can't. Well, the last time Japan didn't medal at 50 was Ire when she lost to Sun, and they got eliminated. in the Olympics. So we'll see. I mean, the Worlds before the Olympics.
Other surprising thing is they only had two women's weights, and as good as Japan is, they only have 53 and 62. I was a little surprised by that. I'd love to know the logic behind that.
Yeah, especially because this is like a national sports festival. And in Greco and freestyle, they had all six Olympic weights. And then you go to women's wrestling, which I would argue is it's done better, even though the men's team is very good now and the Greco team is very good. But women are dominant. And I can't imagine they only had two weights, but I don't know if equality in Japan is where it is in the US at the moment, or the push towards it. But that was a little weird. But 57 was it 59 or 57? They did 59.
62, I think.
62. I'm sorry. Yeah. So 62 was crazy. It just shows how good Japan is. So you had Sarah Natami, who's won ranking series. She's won Asians. She goes up to 62 and she loses to Onishi. Onishi was beating her up. I think it was 8-1 or 9-1 at the time. And then she got a fall. I think it was a body lock and pinned her. But pretty crazy that, so in the two weights you have, an Olympic champion. If anybody would have said, okay, what are the odds of Onishi losing to Natami and Sasaki losing at the same tournament? I think 0 is the answer. And they both lost. That shows how good. And Natami has never she's made age group world teams. She's won senior Asians and beat good people. But she's never made a world team for Japan. And then she goes and beats the world champ, So it just reinforces. And then you look at 62, Onishi's really a 59, but for the Olympics, she'll probably go up. Then you have, Matoki, Azaki's a world champ, will probably go down and try to make it. Then who knows where Sakurai's going to go, probably 57, but then she'll have to deal with Fujinami. And then as an afterthought, you and I talked about, I didn't even mention when we were talking about the landscape at 57, you have Kawhi, her married name, but like Kinjo now, but she just won the world's last year at 59. So it's not like she's over the hill. She's a two-time Olympic gold medalist, didn't make the team last time, and Sakurai won the Olympics, and then Matoki won the Olympics. So the scrub Kawhi is a two-time Olympic champion, multiple world champion, who just won Worlds last year at 59. So they are loaded in this whole in the area, and it'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
Scott, let's end with this. Gary Abbott retiring at USA Wrestling after 37 and a half years. He is the GOAT of women's wrestling coverage. Sometimes he was flying solo in his absolute phenomenal coverage of women's wrestling. We are going to miss him, but his impact cannot be overstated in what he was able to do to make sure that women's wrestling was given the absolute right place that it has in the media landscape.
Absolutely. I mean, he's a fellow Long Islander, absolute, just legend. And really, when, I started following the sport, I remember I used to read like the Mat.com write-ups after each tournament. And Gary always gave the women's tournaments, I'm going to say, equal coverage. He always wrote it up. He really followed it, wrote previews. So, yeah, Gary's going to really be missed. But, Richard Immel, I believe, will be taking the reins, and he does a phenomenal job as well. But, Gary, thank you very much for your service and everything you did to promote women's wrestling.